Isn't it crazy how last week in Romans, as we were talking through this series on transformation and we were looking at Romans 8, and it was talking about, and Paul was talking about this day and age, this sinful day and age. And we talked about what that meant, and that meant that it's this time of this period after Christ has come. Okay? So in this sinful day and age, isn't it crazy the week that we've had? Since last Sunday of being right in here. What a horrific thing to wake up to Monday morning as we look at the tragic loss of life in Vegas. You know, to wake up and still see, not only in Puerto Rico, but from all these storms, people still trying to piece their lives back together. As people to this very day are still preparing for what Nate will do. The things that we have to face in our life, we desperately need God's encouragement in our life. And this morning, we desperately need to know exactly where God is in our life. And so this morning, we're going to continue in Romans 8. This whole sermon series has been wrapped around this idea that with God, we are transformed. We're transformed ultimately into trying to be conformed into the image of His Son. We're ultimately going to be glorified through God who justifies us. We're ultimately going to be complete in Him. We're working towards that. But today we're going to look at who can stand against us in this world, in this broken world. Who can stand against us? And the overall passage this morning is going to be in Romans 8:31 through 39. And as we look at this passage this morning, I'm going to ask you a question. Who's got your back? Who's got your back? Now, I know there's a lot of different ways to say that. I'm older. You know, Gary, when I say, who's got your back, he looks at me and he goes, Gwen, man, she's my ride or die. And I'm like, but I understand what he's saying. Gwen's got his back, right? Gwen is his ride or die. I get it. Who's got your back? Who's always there for you? I like to inform you of who I am sometimes. What makes me me? The experiences that make me me. A lot of times y'all hear my country twang, and y'all know for a fact there's no hiding it that I'm from the South, and sometimes I tell you that I'm from the South and I'm from the rural South. And I am. I'm from deep in the woods South, the boondocks, where there is no service, and we're lucky they ran power. Okay? When I grew up, we had neighbors. Neighbors are within 6 miles of you. That's what neighbors are. And in my neighborhood, I was very, very fortunate in my neighborhood. Within a 10-mile block, there was 3 other guys that were within 2 years of age of me, and one of those happens to be my best friend. When we moved to the house that my parents, what I call home, I was 4 or 5 years old. We moved to this house. It wasn't until I was like 14 or 15 that they paved the road out front. It was a clay road up until that point in time, and it was the happiest time of my life when it was a clay road, because if it rained, there wasn't a bus in the world that could get to us. That was a no school day. Okay, there was no way a bus was getting back there. You had to, and it was hard for any regular car to get back there. But we live on this amazing red clay hill, and it's not like, Georgia's not mountainous. But this is a hill, and it's not like it's long, but it's like at a 7 to 8% grade. And that's a very steep hill. It's very steep. And at the bottom of this hill, which is about 500, 600 yards, the hill is. At the bottom of the hill, there's a creek down there. And when it really, really rained, that creek would build up and it would wash out the bridge every single time. They had this crappy, wooden bridge, and it would wash it out. And it must have washed out like 20 times in my lifetime of living there. And I know that doesn't seem like a lot, but that's once or twice every year we'd have a big rain and it would wash out the bridge. So you couldn't go that way. You could only go one way. This bridge washed out one time. It's done dried out. And I, being a young boy, loved to take my bike and ride up and down that dirt road. Me and who I consider growing up my bestest friend, Jonathan Harrell, we would do all kinds of crazy stuff on our bike. Well, one day we got it in our head that bridge is washed out. We're going to put a ramp down there at the bottom of this bridge, and we're going to get at the top of this hill, and we're going to build up enough speed that we're going to Evel Knievel this gap, you know? But it wasn't just good enough that we were going to do this. We were going to come up off of this. And I've tried to wrap my brains, and I guess it would make it a better story if I just made up something. I cannot remember there was two other guys that lived there, and Joey Hermalik and Eric White. And I can't remember what it was that I bet them myself, what I put up. But I know what was on the line for them. It was an old, this is not going to seem like a big deal, but for somebody that grew up poor in the country, it was big. One of them had an Atari with a couple of games. And if I made that jump, I was going to win that Atari in a couple of games. And I don't forgot what I lost, but I lost something. But anyway, so that should tell you the end of the story. But me and Jonathan said, we're going to jump this thing. If we complete the jump and everything, we make it to the other side, then that's what we're going to win. And they were there watching. I remember this. I went down the hill first. I got going so fast going down that hill that my feet couldn't keep up with the pedals. I just had to throw my legs out. You know, Joe was nodding his head. You've been there, right? You had to the pedals were in the way. They were about to snatch my feet off. I had to throw them out to the side and just go with it, you know. When I hit that ramp, there was a thought in my head that this was a bad mistake. And when I hit the other side, I'm not talking about the road. I'm talking about the embankment, like the coyote on Bugs Bunny. When I hit that other bank, it was the worst feeling that a little 12, 13-year-old boy could ever experience. Because I was crushed into that bank with my bike. But the funniest thing about this story is that like 30 seconds later, I heard another boom, and there right beside me was Jonathan. We're laying there, and for a 12-year-old boy, you think you're dying. And you're crying, and you're moaning, and you're over-dramatizing everything. We're laying there, and I look over at him like, why? Why did you jump? And he looked at me, he said, because you did. You ever had anybody have your back like that? He knew he wasn't going to make the jump. He just saw me kill myself. There's no point. Well, man, we were 12-year-old best friends. If one of us did something, the other one did it, right? You ever had anybody just have your back? You could depend on. God's got your back. In Psalms 46:1, it says, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. The psalmist says in Psalm 121, 1-2, I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. God's got our back, and today we're going to talk about what that looks like, God having our back. We're going to pick up where we left off last week in Romans. We're going to start with verse 31. In Romans 8, verse 31, Paul writes this, what then shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? If God's got our back, if God's standing there, who can stand against us? This idea of who can not only come up against us, but who can stand against us? Because the truth of the matter is there's a lot of things that try to come up against us, right? A lot of different people come up against us. A lot of different circumstances come up against us. A lot of things try to take us down in life. It's not who can come up against us, but who can stand against us. Because when they face God, there is nothing that can stand in the presence of God. Nothing can stand against us. Nothing can overcome that. And that's who has our back. Paul says about these things, what then shall we say to these things? What is he talking about these things? Well, this is the things that we've been going over for the last 2 weeks as we've been dividing this chapter in chapter 8 in this letter that Paul wrote. And these things are different things, but it's, in verse 15 it talks about one of these things is that we have been adopted into God's family. In verse 17, he says we are co-heirs with Christ. In verse 23, it says that when we receive the Spirit, we're guaranteed final redemption. And then last week we talked in verse 26 about our prayers being taken by the Spirit and laid before God. These are the things that he's addressing. That we have been adopted into God's family. That we're co-heirs with Christ. That when we lift our prayers up to God, that God will answer us, and that we're working towards this final redemption that God brings about in our life. These are the things that he's addressing, and if these things are true, then he's building up to this final argument that if all of this is true, if that's what God's done in our life, then who can stand against us? It's very obvious that through these things that God is the one that's protecting us. God is the one that's walking beside us. In other words, God is the one that's got our back. It's God. If God is for us, what does it matter who stands against us? That's something that's very hard for us to wrap our mind around. This morning we're going to talk about how is God for us? And I guess a more correct way to look at that is, what are the signs that God is for us? But how is God for us? And the first sign that we know that God is for us is how He graciously gives to us. He graciously gives to us. In Romans 8:32, the first thing that we see is that He graciously gives His Son to us. He who died did not spare His own Son, but gave Him up for us all. How will He not also with Him graciously give us all things? You get that? He did not spare His own Son, but gave up for us all. How will He not also with Him graciously give all things? Now think about that passage there. He gave up His Son. But when you look at that, He didn't spare His own Son, but He gave Him up for us all. Now, right there at that point, when God gave up His Son for us all, what were we to God? What were we to God? We weren't His children at the point that He gave up His Son. We were His enemies. We were still separated from Him. We had not yet accepted Christ. Over in Romans 5, you might remember this from previous message, but over in Romans 5:10, it says, "For if while we were enemies, we were reconciled to God by the death of His Son. Much more, now that we are reconciled, shall we be saved by His life." So when God gave up His Son for us, when He graciously gave Jesus Christ for us, we were His enemies. And Paul's saying in our passage, how much more so will He give to us now that we're His children? If He would do that, if He would give up the most precious gift, the most valuable gift in the world while we were His enemies, how much more graciously will He give now that we belong to Him? That's a rhetorical question. I don't know that we can even put an answer to that. How much more will He give? He's given everything while we were yet reconciled to Him. He goes on in our passage and it's declared that He would give all things to us. In Romans 8:33 through 35, it says this, "Who shall bring any charge against God's elect? It is God who justifies. Who is to condemn? Christ Jesus is the one who died. More than that, who was raised, who is at the right hand of God, who indeed is interceding for us. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword?" He graciously gives us all things. In that passage, there follows this litany of different disasters there that could occur. This famine or nakedness, it could also be determined as destitution, danger or sword, peril or life. But the message is that who can separate us from the presence of God? God's got our back because He loves us. We can see that in one way by the way He gives to us. Who can separate us from that? Nobody. None of these things can separate us from that. He gives us all things because of His love. Not because of some requirement or any other reason, but because He loves us. He stands with us and He protects us, and none of these things can come against us. We worry about so many things in our life. We build up anxiety about so many things in our life because of the very thing that this is talking about. See, God never abandons us. When we belong to God, God has never abandoned us. He is always there. Yet we fool ourselves into believing that's not true. And we distill in ourselves a lack of trust. And when we have a lack of trust in God, anxiety creeps into our life. And when anxiety creeps into our life, what happens is we start panicking. We start worrying about the things that we need. We start worrying about how this is going to happen. We spend amazing amount of fruitless time making plans that we can never enact. We become frustrated, we become angry, we become depressed, we become so many different things because of that. Because we don't trust God, because we do not recognize that God is standing there and He's got our back. In Matthew 6:25-26, Jesus says, "Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you put on. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they?" Are you not of more value than they? God's got our back. He amazingly has our back. Not only does He graciously provide for us, but secondly, we can see that He is with us because He grants us victory. He grants us victory. This summer I got to do something that I've always wanted to do, and it's ridiculous that I hadn't done it before then because I was stationed there. But when I was younger, man, I was stationed in San Antonio at Fort Sam Houston, and right there in the middle of San Antonio is the Alamo. And the whole time that I was stationed there at Fort Sam Houston, occasion upon occasion, I never got the opportunity to go into the Alamo. This summer, on a family vacation, when we went out west to go camping and we had the time of our life, we finally got to go into the Alamo. It is a ridiculously small place. It was way bigger in my mind than it is in actuality. It's a small place, and that's because, if you didn't know this, the Alamo was never a fort. Hollywood, when they depict it in movies, make it like it was this fortress and everything. It was a mission. It was a mission house. Several houses there for Spanish missions, and they overtook it. First the Mexican army, and then the Texan Mexican army, because they weren't Texans yet. The Texan Mexican army, which was in rebellion to the Mexican government at that time. They overtook the mission, and then this general, Sam Houston, decided that they were going to abandon it. Gave orders to abandon it. Did you know that? That the people there at the Alamo, that they weren't even supposed to be there? So, they were supposed to abandon it, but there was these volunteers there at the Alamo at one of the greatest battles in American history, as far as it's defining who Americans were, and especially who Texans were, not because of the death toll. At one of the finest battles in defining who we are as a country, and especially Texas as a state, these men defied orders. They were volunteers at that point. And there with Jim Bowie and later with Daniel Boone, they set up with less than 200 men in this mission, and they stood against Santa Anna's, the General of Mexico's armies. 6,000 men. 200 men against 6,000 men. And these 200 men stood there behind those mission walls, and they fought those 6,000 men. Historians have different calculations on the amount. But at the end, Santa Anna's army had about 1,500 people left in its army. Those 200 men stood up and almost defeated that large army. Every man in the Alamo was killed. Every single one of them. At the end, there was about 6 people that they took prisoners, but they executed them. They did let a couple of the women go. There in that stand, in that battle, those men gave up their lives. And you know what happened? Up until that point, up until that battle, the Mexican army was handily defeating everything that the Mexican army was throwing at. There was absolutely no victory on any field that had been established. General Sam Houston had given the order to abandon the Alamo, and from that time, he was fleeing from battle to battle. They were going to withdraw out of it. Texas would never have came about. That part of the United States would never have came about if it hadn't have been for 200 men who were not even supposed to be there, that volunteered to be there. But at that moment, when all those men were murdered, died. Murder's a strong word. They chose to battle. When they died, from that moment on, the rest of the war, the cry that could be heard before any battle ensued was, "Remember the Alamo." The ideal of whether even these 200 men had this ideal or not, the ideal that was placed there was that these 200 men had stood up for freedom, and it was so worth that they gave their lives in defense of this place to stand against the Mexican army, and that ideal was embraced, and so this cry infused this army, and that's how Texas came about. Because from that point on, the tide of war was changed, and the Texan-Mexican army dropped the Mexican and became the Texan army, and they became what's known as the One Republic, one together. Remember the Alamo. And Texas came about. It's amazing. It's an amazing story. It's an amazing battle. And I wanted to see that. And it reminded me, sometimes in our life, we have battles like that. Overwhelming battles in our life that we face. We see them coming. We know we're coming. We're coming to a time where that storm's going to be upon us. We know, and we're embracing for it, and we're preparing for it, and we know what we need to do. We're not sure how we're going to come out on the other end, but we know that battle's coming. Sometimes it's like that. And then there's a lot of times in our life that we don't see the battles coming. We're walking along, happy as all get out. We just don't see the battles coming. I have a word for you today about the battles that you face in life. He grants us victories. In Romans 8:36-39, it says, "As it is written, for your sake we are being killed all the day long. We are regarded as sheep to be slaughtered. Knowing all these things, we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am sure that neither death nor life, nor angels nor rulers, nor things present nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God and Christ Jesus our Lord." You know, we talked about Him giving graciously, and that comes from the fact that He is an ever-loving God with an everlasting love from us. But there's something else about God. His presence is inseparable from us. When I talk about having our back, it's inseparable. Fortunately, thankfully, amazingly, my relationship with God is not dependent upon my feeble grasp on Him, but rather His amazing grasp on me. He has me, and it's inseparable. There's nothing that can take that away. There's nothing that can remove God from my life. No power, no authority, nothing supernatural, nothing natural. No height nor depth, nothing can separate me from God. He is with me for all time. Somebody once said that if you stand up and the entire world, and I'm going to go further than their statement, if the entire world, and then let's back up, if all of creation throughout time. So let's make an amazing picture. If I stood up by myself and the entire world was against me, and then let's include all history, all time and all future history, okay? So what I'm going to go back and every person that's out there right now, in every army, every person, of every gender, of every race, was standing up against me and they all opposed me. And then let's just throw in Attila the Hun and all his armies, and let's throw in Alexander the Great and all his armies, and let's throw in every Roman that we can possibly think of. Let's throw in all the Assyrians. Let's throw in everybody from all time stood up against me, and the only person that was standing there with me was God. You know what I find myself in? The majority. Because with God on my side, there is nothing that can stand against me. And His Word says, there's no chance He's not on my side. There's nothing that can separate me and Him. Inseparable. Everlasting love and inseparable love of God. So the things that I face in life, I do not face those alone. The battles, the great battles, the overwhelming battles that I see coming, God stands with me. And those battles I don't see coming, God stands with me. Because there are times, and you know that this is true, there are times when everything in life seems amazingly good. And it's like you just walk around the corner and somebody sucker punches you. You know what I mean by that? You didn't see it coming. 4 years ago yesterday, my dad died. Enough of you know enough about me to know that I have faced some difficult things, to say the least, in my life. None of those things came close to overcoming me like the death of my dad. To this day, it's like depression wants to creep in to my life, and I don't know why. I know my dad's in a better place. I can logically explain a lot of this away. But it's like I have to battle. I'm functional. I'm trying to be transparent with you, so. I'm functional. But there's something that goes on in my mind. There's this battle that goes on in my mind because life doesn't match up in all ways to the way that I wanted it to be. And there's no enemy that I can lay my hand on. There's no wall that I can put up and begin to fight, but there's still a real battle that goes on. And that battle at times feels as if I'm in it by myself and that nobody else will understand. And it's a lonely battle. And what Satan would love for me to sink my teeth into, to make me ineffective as a husband, to make me ineffective as a father, to make me ineffective as a friend, to make me ineffective as a Christian, is that I am facing this by myself, that it is foolish. Oh, but when I pick up God's Word, when I spend time with Him, when I'm reminded of the fact that in my weakness, in my suffering, that God is standing with me, that God has my back. Oh, in Deuteronomy 24 it says, "For the Lord your God, He is He who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies, to give you the victory." And he was talking about the enemies that were standing against the children of Israel, but there's nothing that's more true to this very day, that He is standing against my enemy, no matter what it is. In 2 Corinthians 2:14 it says, "But thanks be to God, who in Christ always leads us in triumphal procession, and through us spreads the fragrance of the knowledge of Him everywhere." Through triumphal procession, He guarantees us victory. It says in Romans 8, "More than conquerors are we." More than conquerors are we, because it's God who stands with us. It's God who has our back. And there's nothing that can stand against Him. Nothing. This morning, can you tell me something that you've overcome because of God? Is there something that's hard for you to conquer, that you need to feel God's presence? He's there. Do you need to realize that truth this morning, that He's there to face this with you? When me and my beautiful wife got married, man, was it love. Still is. But there's one thing that my Mary, she never ever wanted. She never ever wanted to be with a man who smoked. Her parents smoked. She hated smoking. She always kind of walked the other way from people that smoke. But as all of you have come to the same conclusion, I am a good-looking man. So I won her over, even though I smoke. But then in our marriage, she begged me to stop smoking. I told her I would. Time ticked along, and I tried several things I could not. And I tried an amazing amount of things. I tried the shoulder patches and tablets. There was one tablet that I took, which I don't know why Mary let me, but I was taking it, and she's like, this is the same thing as antidepressant drugs and everything else like that. And I'm like, okay, whatever. She said, now there is a small chance that one day you just might go psychotic and kill all of us taking that. Well, it's not worth quitting, baby. Why are we gambling with that? So I stopped taking that. But I tried a lot of different things, but there was this one time this guy came in, and he was preaching a revival at church, and he said, that even in small things, in your mind are small things, they're big, and they have a hold on you in your life. And at that time, smoking had a hold on my life. He said, if it's something that you truly want to face and it's something that you truly want to overcome, depend on Jesus. It seemed like such a simple message. For the next couple of weeks, every time that I had an urge to smoke a cigarette, I prayed. First 2 weeks, it was like a constant prayer. Like every 5 minutes, I'm in prayer. Which grew me as a man. Grew me as a man. But do you know that with the help of Christ in my life, that battle, which was one hard battle, I overcame it. I did. There are things that we face in our life that we need to realize this very moment we do not face alone. When we belong to God, God has our